They say peace is just the silence between storms, but for me, peace always looked a lot like routine. Rolling out of bed before sunrise, feeding chickens, walking the fence line, checking the runoff trench behind my old barn. That trench, just a shallow scar in the earth, had been there longer than me, maybe longer than the houses themselves. One of those things you don't notice until you need it, or until someone decides you don't. I've never been much for fancy titles or highfalutin words. Just a 57-year-old widower with a barn that creaks in the wind and a lifetime of knowing how land is supposed to work. When I left the Corps of Engineers and bought this edge lot out in Ridgeview Meadows, I didn't need much, just space, a rhythm, a place that was mine. My wife Linda and I raised 2 kids in that weather-beaten house, both long since flown the nest, but after Linda passed, the barn and that land became my anchor. The HOA? Well, in the beginning, they were just signatures at the bottom of newsletters, little reminders to trim hedges, take down Christmas lights, nothing worth a fuss. That was before folks like Karen Whitmore got power, before clipboards became scepters and new board members started treating the neighborhood like their own private kingdom. Karen, always in wedge heels, always with a scowl so sharp it could peel paint, always with that clipboard hugged to her chest like a badge. Even then, I mostly kept to myself, painted my own fence when I wanted, cleared the trench every spring, minded my own business. Nobody complained. Not to my face, anyway. But things change. First, it was mandatory landscaping surveys, neighbors peering over the fence with binoculars like I was tunneling out of Alcatraz. Then one chilly afternoon, I got a letter in a fancy cream envelope, HOA seal gleaming like they'd knighted themselves. The letter said my unauthorized trench on Lot 42 violated communal landscape uniformity. Now, this trench wasn't some vanity project. I'd seen on the original blueprints, marked clear as day. It kept the stormwater from the hills behind us moving safely out to the retention basin. Didn't matter if it was ugly, it worked. I replied with old city drainage maps and photos. They sent another letter, this time colder, blunter. Aesthetic non-compliance. No mention of engineering, just the look. A couple weeks later, I came home from the feed store and found 2 guys in orange vests dumping gravel into my trench. Karen strolled up, all business. We're upgrading the space to match the rest of the community. I said, it's not supposed to look nice. It's supposed to move water. She gave me that patronizing smile, like you give a dog who's too old to fetch. The next morning, I found my trench gone, buried beneath gravel and pavers, a neat little grave with a few new shrubs sticking out like feathers in a cap. I stood there, staring at 30 years of stormwater engineering and a whole lot of lived experience erased by someone's Pinterest vision of community beautification. That's when I got the completion notice, thanking me for my cooperation. Yeah, that happened. So I did what I always do when something's wrong. I documented everything. Sent letters, diagrams, satellite photos, cited the hydrology report that said the trench was essential. Didn't matter. 3 days later, a new letter, now with legal threats about interference with HOA operations. Apparently, standing up for common sense is harassment now. Then the rain started. Not a storm at first, just a persistent whisper on the barn's roof. But I knew what would happen. See, back when Linda was alive, back in 2008, we'd barely moved in when a spring storm rolled through, and the runoff almost destroyed the barn. We dug the original trench by flashlight, knee-deep in freezing water. That flood warped the floorboards, cost us a season's worth of feed, but we learned. Nature's lessons are the only ones that stick. So when the trench got buried, I marched down to the city engineering office. Greg Myers, good man, practical, pulled up the flood map and shook his head. They filled your trench on a floodplain? That's reckless. He told me, document everything. The next storm, you'll need proof. Sure enough, the next storm didn't come with a bang. It came with a creeping heaviness, rain soaking the earth until it stopped soaking and started moving. I watched as water pooled right where my trench used to be, creeping toward the barn, then toward the brand new beautified path, then on, searching for its old escape. And when it found none, it did what water does. It looked for lower ground. Funny thing, the HOA's pride and joy was their new clubhouse, glass and vinyl, espresso bar, yoga studio. That spring, I watched the rain cut channels through the fancy mulch beds, watched as a contractor in a yellow poncho poked around, shrugged, and left. That night, rain came sideways, hard and unrelenting. By 2 a.m., I watched a chunk of the clubhouse's rear patio slide into a slurry pit. By sunrise, the parking lot was half submerged. Mud and trash swept through the reading lounge, silt piled up like dirty snowdrifts. And not a soul said a word to me. When I passed Karen that morning, her pink rain boots planted in a puddle, staring at the mess, she didn't speak. Didn't have to. The land had spoken for me. The next 2 days, I filed every report I could think of: photos, rainfall charts, drone footage. Dropped it all at the HOA office. No note, just proof. That evening, Karen knocked on my door. She was soaked, not from rain, but from shame. "We'd like your assistance with remediation planning," she said. Remediation. They always use soft words for hard things. I told her straight, this wasn't about aesthetics, Karen. It was about water, and you ignored every warning. She tried to justify it. There were aesthetic concerns, the board. I cut her off. Water doesn't care about your landscaping. It finds a way. I filed a formal complaint with the city. Greg Myers backed me up, and suddenly the HOA was looking at city fines and possible state violations. The next board meeting, held over Zoom, since the clubhouse was half buried in mud. I spoke up. Before you move forward, you need to look backward at what caused this. Other residents joined in. People who'd lost gardens, basements, memories. The tide turned, and the board, Karen included, reluctantly formed a subcommittee to fix the drainage, with me as chair. I didn't want the job. Part of me wanted to watch them dig themselves out. But the other part, the part that remembers digging trenches in the dark with Linda, knew I had to help. Not for them, but for the land, for the people who'd come after. We started rebuilding. The first thing I did was lay out the truth. Over-engineered plans, French drains, swales, rock veins that wouldn't wash out. I spent hours on my workbench, pulling old maps and tools from my core days, sketching, calculating. Greg called one morning. Forecast says 4 to 6 inches in the next day. We're running out of time. The new trench wasn't ready, the ground already waterlogged. That night, the storm hit soft but steady. The ground began to slide, not dramatic but inexorable. I saw Karen's SUV parked too close to the runoff path, ran over in the downpour, banging on the glass till she woke up. We barely got the car out before a wall of mud washed through the lot. No one was hurt. This time, the damage was ugly, but not deadly. After that, neighbors joined in. We built makeshift barriers, dug temporary channels, worked together through the night. For the first time, it felt like a real neighborhood. Folks helping each other because it mattered, not because the HOA told them to. And when the sun rose, we saw what was left. Half the hill had given way. The clubhouse buried up to its eaves, the land taking back what was always its own. That morning, city crews arrived. Greg Myers shook his head. "Damn fools," he muttered, taking photos. Later, a young engineer handed me a laminated map. "If they'd listened to your redesign, this wouldn't have happened." I didn't feel vindicated, just tired. That night, in a garage lit by string lights, the board tried to explain themselves, but nobody wanted excuses. They resigned, quietly, finally, without ceremony. The city stepped in, fined the HOA for illegal land modification, froze their funds, and opened an investigation. But for me, the most satisfying moment was when the city officially designated my trench as critical water infrastructure. No more landscaping committees, no more threats, just a scar in the earth that finally got the respect it deserved. Funny thing, after the dust settled, neighbors started knocking on my door. Paul from 3 houses down, the guy who once complained about my compost pile, asked if I could help him with his flooded crawl space. Estelle wanted advice for her garden. Even Jared, the college kid with headphones, showed up with drone footage and questions. Before long, I was holding workshops, explaining runoff and slope ratios, teaching folks to read the land. Karen started showing up too, quiet first, then asking real questions, even taking notes. We rebuilt the trench, Wider, deeper, better. Put in a bioswale, planted native grasses, and turned the hillside behind the ruined clubhouse into a terraced rain garden. The new council, no more HOA, just volunteers, ran things openly, honestly. People learned. Kids called the trench the mini river, but they respected it, knew not to mess with it. Even Karen changed. She joined a regional watershed committee, started studying soil science. One day, she left a book on my porch with a note. "You taught me more than this book ever could." Months passed. The rains returned, but this time, they didn't bring disaster, just the steady sound of water moving where it was meant to go. The city gave us a plaque for community resilience. I hung it inside the barn, out of sight, because in the end, it wasn't about credit. It was about finally listening to the land and to each other. People ask if I regret not leaving after all that, but I don't. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay. Stay and protect what matters, even when nobody listens. Because the land remembers. And now, so what does this community? So let me ask you, when was the last time you listened to the ground under your own feet? Would you have stood your ground or walked away? Drop your thoughts below. Tell me your story, your storm, your victory. Justice isn't about being right. It's about doing right, even when it's hard. And if you've ever tangled with a board, a boss, a bully who thought they knew better, share your battle in the comments. Because sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one stubborn voice that refuses to be washed away.